So come to the library's homepage. Then come here to the research guide tabs. When we get here by subject, go ahead and scroll down to nursing and click Nursing APA. So this is where you can download the PDF. Again, totally encourage you to do this if seeing the screen can be difficult. It'll also have all of these links embedded in it here that we're going to be looking at during the presentation. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and minimize that and let's get the workshop going. Alrighty, so how many of you feel like this Tyrannosaurus Rex and the elderly King Kong, the very dignified elderly King Kong? How many of you do feel like this doesn't make sense or this freaks me out? Alrighty. First thing I want to say is you're normal. APA is, and any citation style is a kind of complex code. And we're as students expected to become functional with it, but that doesn't make it easy. Let me skip to this one here real quick. And we all scream about citations. Professor back there is like, yeah. I will kind of mention here, I still get faculty that contact me sometimes and say, I've never cited something like this. How do I need to do it? So I want you to understand that, know that. Sometimes students will come to me and they'll say, oh, I feel so stupid because I don't know how to do this. It's like, when you give yourself permission to feel stupid, but don't feel bad about feeling stupid. Does that make sense? Because it is complicated. I myself will oftentimes refer either to the Purdue Owl, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Or sometimes if the question is a little bit more complicated, I will refer to the APA publication manual. And here's a little secret, so do your professors. So I want you to start off and get comfortable that this is going to be discomforting, but it's not impossible. We're going to give you some tools, hit some of the high points again. Okay, so here are the objectives. Here's what I want you to, what I'm hoping you'll get out of this presentation. Know what APA style is and why it's used. I find that oftentimes we don't talk about the why often enough. Is it off sharing? Okay, thank you. Know what APA style is and why it's used. I think we don't do a very good job of teaching the why. And so it becomes so, right, from a user's perspective, if we don't know why we're doing what we're doing, it can become very frustrating because there's just, doesn't seem like there's a point. Anybody felt like that? Right? So I want to talk about that. I want to talk a little bit about using the Purdue Owl. I think it's a good resource, and also talk about some of the rules for in-text citation. We're going to cover some of the more common rules and variations for you. Variations, I guess, there's a common pattern, but there are several variations on that pattern. We're going to talk about those concepts here. Going to learn the 4 questions of references. How many get really confused or lost when you're looking at end reference on your reference page. Right, some of that looked like Egyptian. This is not something I'm used to seeing. There's actually a very basic pattern to it. And once you understand that pattern, they become much easier to read and work with. We're going to learn about Saint Search tools in citation tools in Saint Search and other databases. How many have used citation tools from a database or something like that? How did that work out? Yeah, we're using internet, and part of the reason is what those tools are using is they're extracting data from descriptive information about the item. If that information isn't created correctly, then it's not going to come out correctly. So when we get to this, one of the things, I'll repeat this when we get there, one of the things I like to tell students is that these machine-generated citations, as they're called, they do about 80% of the work for us. Our 20% is to proofread that and correct errors. That make sense? And also, I was asked to talk about some aspects of formatting and writing style. So we're going to incorporate some of those ideas. Seem okay? Yeah. Okay. APA. APA stands for American Psychology Association. This is, and it's a format or a system for documenting research. So it's used extensively in the social sciences. Nursing is a really interesting field because it's a combination of a social science. You've got to understand the psychology of your patients, and you've also got to understand their sociological setting. You know, where are they coming from sociologically and psychology? But it's also health science, and so it's a physical science. So it's a really interesting kind of blended field of study. So that's why we use it in here. And most of the journals that I've been able to see either use APA or they'll use Chicago, and also AMA, American Medical Association. So APA is a good one. One point I like to point out to students at this point in time, once you get good and fluent, functional with one system of citation, other systems make sense. There's going to be slight changes in punctuation. Maybe the elements are going to be in a slightly different order. But in general, it's going to make sense. Does anybody notice that with a crossover from MLA to APA? Good. I'm glad to see y'all are noticing that. A lot of students don't catch onto that very quickly. By the way, MLA, you learned MLA in first year writing because that's most English professors. That's the style they're most familiar with. That's the dominant style in the humanities. So that's why you learn that. So why do we use citations? I think this is an important concept to have here. Scholarship in general, when I say it like that, scholarship rather than a scholarship, does that difference make sense to you? Educated person. Yes, that's one good way to think about it. A scholar is somebody who has dedicated themselves to a particular field of study, and that drives their career. In some cases, it kind of drives their lives. I know some independent scholars, and so they're not associated with a university. They're not associated with a think tank or a policy group, but they're driven by these ideas. So scholarship, what is a scholarship then, do you think? Kind of knowing that about the term scholarship, what do you think a scholarship is? Somebody who aspires to be an educated person, right? So we get scholarships. I like to say, students, think of yourselves as scholars in training. You're paid a scholarship and other benefits to help you pursue your studies. Does that make sense? Okay. So when I say that scholarship is a conversation, what we're talking about, right, is all of these experts and knowledgeable people, educated people in these specific fields that talk to one another. And they talk to one another in several different ways. In this picture here, right, we can see this is at a conference. Let's see if I can minimize this a little bit more. At a conference session. And other ways that they communicate with each other are through scholarly papers and books, book chapters. It's really kind of interesting now. There's video presentations are becoming much more, a much wider used tool in scholarship. And I think that's pretty exciting. Right, so you can go on to YouTube. How many know about Vimeo? V-I-M-E-O. Vimeo, yeah, Vimeo is kind of a way I like to say it is it's a dressed up form of YouTube. And there's a lot of scholars that put content out there for us. It's fantastic. Right, so these conversations take place over vast amounts of time and space. So let me give you a little thought experiment here. This is one of the oldest scholarly questions in the world. Right, you ready for it? What is the nature of God? How long have people been talking about that? Yeah. When your colleagues responded, since people have been talking. Yeah, totally. Where do we find participants in this conversation? Where do we find people engaged with this question? What is the nature of God? All over the world, yeah. So this is a very old conversation, right? What I want to try to help y'all understand today is that within the field of nursing, you are already participants in this. You're learning about it. You're gaining a level of knowledge and expertise about it. The second bullet point here, the student papers and presentations are part of that conversation. Right? So we participate in that conversation when we read, but when we write, we're participating in that conversation. Right? We're showing that we've heard it, and this is something that I can bring to it, or this is an observation, or in the case of like reflection papers, right? This is my experience with this part of the field. Does that make sense? Right, yeah, so you're scholars in training as students. And here's a really important one. Citations show that we're listening in. Citations are a way for us to tell our professors, this is what I have heard from this conversation. Later on, if any of you publish professionally, that's the way you tell editors and your colleagues, this is what I have heard in the conversation. And then the last thing, which is everybody says, oh, it allows others to find where you got your information. I actually kind of consider that a secondary reason. I think these first reasons are the most important reasons to demonstrate I've done my homework. I'm going to say something, but here's how I've prepared for that. Does that make sense? Because really, the only people who become interested in where you got your information are sometimes your professor will notice something fishy in a citation. Will go, your professor of that is chuckling a little bit. I'm sure that's never happened. But other scholars, if you publish, other scholars will be interested in that. Where is this coming from? Let me kind of understand this a little bit more, especially if they kind of disagree. And they're going to want to follow that line of thinking. In scholarship, we want to be very open about that. That make sense? Okay. Does this help to kind of give us context as to why we're using citations? My experience has been once we get a sense of why we're doing this, actually doing it then becomes a little bit easier, and we become a little more willing to put up with some of the trickiness of it.